with Dembele, the reason I start this before we get into, again, striker, left back, right back, and potentially center back, 4 positions that are of need, where there will be holes based on the players that the club wants to remove. If Dembele renews, I don't see the club then prioritizing Rafinha from Leeds United, especially with Leeds likely not getting relegated this year. I don't see how Rafinha is on his way. Again, the club is going to have Trincao basically plopped right back in their lap that they're going to have to figure out. And again, it's a lot easier to sell a player on in theory than it is to actually sell a player. But I actually also think that the agreement with Wolves, it's more like Wolves is going to be stuck with Trincao, and Barcelona have kind of, I think, pretty much already agreed to pay the 30 million euros for Adama Traore. And it would be something about going back on their word in that way on Adama Traore if they chose to move on, where he was this insurance policy to Dembele. And with Dembele's health record, even if he renews, I think you're still going to see that same rotation next year, that Adama Traore is a clear-cut backup to Dembele, because how are they going to possibly afford 35, 40 million to go out to get a backup for Dembele and Rafinha, who can only really play on the right wing because he's all left foot? Or is that correct, right? He's all left foot, or then he goes to the left side. And then that's, Xavi could try him there, but certainly he's not a player that plays in the middle or has much versatility other than playing on the right wing, where he is really only solely comfortable.
Yeah, and with Rafinha, I think there's an element of caution, because I don't think he's been as good as some people suggest. I mean, I remember in February I was at an Everton game when he played Leeds, and the steward next to the press box said to one of the local Leeds-centric journalists about, he's a brilliant player. And I don't know if it was because they lost quite heavily or if he was in a bad spell of form, but he basically said, you can have him, which I found quite surprising, because I thought he'd shone out in a largely poor team. But I mean, this was under Marcel Bielsa. Obviously, Jesse Marsch being in there now, it's probably changed things a little. I think we probably would be a bit more reticent to let him go. But again, as you say, if Barca bring him in, he is going to be a backup, and that's the biggest problem. You can't just sign backup players for the sake of it, because the financial situation is such that the club can't afford to be having these luxuries. No doubt he's a good player. And obviously there is some leverage there with obviously Deco being his representative, and we obviously know about him. But if he's going to come in ostensibly as a backup, then it's not really a gamble you want to be taking. There are, as you say, better areas that need prioritising if Dembele renews.
Well, yeah, and then we spoke about the front line, where even if you have Aubameyang continue on next year, Ansu, who knows what shape he's in, also isn't he a left winger, right? And Ferran Torres, is he a winger or is he a center forward? So that number 9, that's where we transition to that number 9 position. Obviously Erling Haaland, we've thrown that way out. He's definitely going to Man City. But for that number 9 position, you're still going to need some kind of striker, because again, Luke de Jong is going back to Sevilla. You have Martin Braithwaite will no longer be around. And so you do have positions available. And even I've mentioned Ferran Jugla as scoring 21 goals between the B team and the first team this year. He could get spot number 24, 25. He could become a warm body that replaces, and they're going to need that, whether it's Balde at left back, whether it's Jugla at center forward, or whether it's there's somebody else coming up from the B team. They're going to need from 23, 24, 25, somebody to replace the likes of Mingueza and Braithwaite. And Luke de Jong he's been player, 15 or 16, in that case. But to speak about the number 9 position, we have to start and kind of almost end with Robert Lewandowski, right? Because you want to ask, if not him, then who? Because it's either Bayern or Barca for Lewandowski. The heavy links are real, obviously. It's supposedly going to take 40 to 50 million to get him from Bayern, because he still has a contract for another year. And he is going to be 34 in August. So those are all alarm bells with him wanting a 3-year deal. Yet, I've said this before, Richard, on this podcast, with 48 goals in 43 matches this season for Bayern Munich, I'm not sure how worried I am about a 3-year deal for him. Even if there is some kind of drop-off, obviously, in the next year or two or whatever, next season, he helps you contend for the Liga title, regardless of who Madrid gets. Like, that's what you're getting as a number 9 right now in 2022. You're getting a top 2, 3, right? He's a year away. A year prior from having been definitely probably the Ballon d'Or winner 2 years ago, right? So it's like Lewandowski, if Barca can get him even for 40 mil, I think you really, really do consider that, even though he's 34, because I think this is an exception to that age rule. And it is weird because when we also mentioned Azpilicueta being 33, like now you're what? You want to upgrade the starting 11 of PK, Busquets, Alba, and add Azpilicueta and Lewandowski. Now that's where the problem begins, where you're just reinforcing with guys in their mid, and Alves too, guys in their mid to late 30s. But Lewandowski, where are you on that? Yay or nay? And what's the cost value analysis for Lewandowski, Richard?
I think you're right, Dan. I think he does have an incredible goal scoring streak. I think if you look at the numbers, probably only Karim Benzema has anything close to those numbers this season. And he's another player who's been excelling in the latter stage of his career. I'm always wary with Barca signing senior players, shall we say, because we look what happened with Aguero, Luke de Jong, as you say, and bringing players in who are probably past their peak but can still offer something. But I think Lewandowski is a very big exception to that rule. I think his was immense, and if the pandemic hadn't happened, he probably would have won the Ballon d'Or. He probably should have won it last year, but obviously Leo won it. So for me, 40-50 million is probably small change if you have it in the budget to get a player of that quality, because there are other players who'll be available who not necessarily define number nines, out and out number nines, more versatile attackers who can operate that central position. And I do think there are merits to that. But if you want someone who just gets pure goals, having a Benzema type, because as you say, Madrid are probably going to get Mbappe, City are going to get Haaland, you need to have someone who can fight among them. And if you can take one of the best strikers in this generation for a modest fee, let's be honest, 50-60 million is still quite high, but it'd probably be double, triple that probably a few years ago. So for that valuation would be pretty good. But as I say, it all depends on the budget, and if not, then they have to look at alternatives, and there are alternatives out there, but not buying number nines.
Well, that's some of the irony, right? That Barcelona would like to, and I think they should be emphasizing upgrading their back line and reinforcing those positions. But in the same respect, since Xavi moved in with this pressing system that he uses, as much as you question Busquets' volatility in it, and PK, whether he's in the club and they're not allowing goals, or whether he's out and they're leaking goals, that back line is actually much improved under Xavi. And, numerically, even if results have been hot and cold, and recently, even though the results were poor, the back line still only leaked in, the Eintracht Frankfurt loss at home was the rough one in leg 2. But I mean, Rayo and Cadiz, if Lewandowski scores a brace in the first 15 minutes, those matches are way beyond over. And so I think as much as I try to galaxy brain it to say the back line certainly needs to be reinforced with the names we're about to say, the number 9 position, that striker position, is what wins you games. Goals win games, no matter what. It's not even about outscoring, because the way Lewandowski scores goals, that matters. Like scoring first in what does Bayern score? Like 82% of games they score first. So like if you score first, that puts your opponent in a place where teams like Rayo and Cadiz, they can't possibly come out of their shape enough to contend or to fight back in those games. You got some other names though that, and it's funny because you and I, when we just a little disclaimer here, we talked beforehand, so much of your emphasis is watching the Premier League and mentioning some Premier League players. And my emphasis was looking through Bundesliga, Liga, or other La Liga teams. So yeah, there's some Premier League names that you have heard floated out there. And I guess if you could also throw in some of the numbers that we're seeing, because I mean, Lewandowski is a guy that we're saying 40 to 50 mil makes sense. But I mean, how much are these guys worth? And the first name I'm going to throw to you is even Darwin Nunez from Benfica, that I've heard 70 million. And I think Darwin Nunez for Barcelona would be worth it for 40 million. But, how is a player not worth it from 40 to 70? But he's not. Like, that's why we value, and there's a market valuation for these players.
Yeah, it comes down to obviously the extreme financial situation. And Nunez, I don't doubt that there are clubs who can pay the 70, but is that really going to pay off for Barcelona? I mean, he's a great player, no question. I saw him against Liverpool in the Champions League recently, and he is a real threat. But is he, if you're paying 70 million for him and it's 50 for Lewandowski, I think you look at the track record and Lewandowski speaks for itself, and you would go for him over Nunez. But also, if you do go for someone like Nunez and a lot of the other players that have been mentioned recently, they do have the flexibility, so they can shift out the wing and drop the number 10 role if needed, because Xavi's system needs flexibility. You can't just be on a stringent, 4-3-3 or 3-4-3 or even a 4-3-1. You have to mix it up and you have to move the players across the lines. And I think if you have someone like Nunez, that does give you that flexibility. But 70 million, I mean, if we were talking pre-2020, you'd probably say, yeah, very much attainable. But the picture's changed at Barça, the picture's changed in world football, and you look at what I think you've got Ruben Dias off Manchester City. They're not going to sell cheap, and 70 million is probably an adequate valuation. But unfortunately, it's too much for Barca to go in on, really.
Well, what are some of the other names from the Premier League that you have heard and seen?
So one that I've been quite intrigued by was Gabriel Jesus at Manchester City. Similar to Nunez, not a traditional number 9. And obviously, it's quite interesting that he worked alongside Sergio Aguero before he left for Barca. He was a different sort of player. I mean, I remember when Pep came in, he wasn't happy with Aguero's lack of pressing and his work rate off the ball. And obviously, he got up to that level, but Jesus has been ready-made for that. I think Pep was really effusive in the praise of him. But it's not just that. He diversifies his execution with goals. I looked at, these are only Premier League stats, but he scored 31 with his left foot and 16 with his right foot. And then you can contrast that with Aguero again, only in the Premier League. 130 with his right, 34 left. So it's not even a 50-50 split, or a 75-25 rather, like it is with Jesus. And also he's well known with the Brazil national team. I think Dani Alves a few years ago, it was 2017, said he'll be the new Ronaldo, he'll be the new phenomenal, which is high praise indeed. And I think there are a lot of clubs who are going to be in for him. There's talk of Arsenal, there's talk of teams in Germany and Spain. Would he be worth it at 50-60 million? Possibly. He's mid-20s, he's developed a lot. And again, he's a player who can play across the lines, so that would be a good option. But whether the deal works, right, because if we're saying that 70 million for Nunez doesn't work, then 60 million for Jesus is probably out of the question. And then there's a couple more left field ones. People will probably be expecting this one because of the form they're in, but Mohamed Salah and Sadio Mane at Liverpool, both out of contract in the next season. Again, players who can operate off the line. Mane in particular has really evolved his position. He started on the right when he came to Liverpool, then he moved in central, then he moved on to the left, because Luis Diaz came in from Porto. And funny enough, I spoke to Ronald Koeman, former fitness coach, recently when he was at the Netherlands, Everton and Southampton, and he said Mane is relentless in terms of how he prepares his body. He does like 60-metre sprints a day before a game, and that was at Southampton. So I can imagine he still does that. And, he's clearly able to provide assists and get goals himself, and Salah speaks for himself, really. But, I mean, with those two, I have a bit of a concern because obviously Liverpool don't like to sell players cheap, and we saw what the last time Barca bought a player from Liverpool, they basically bankrolled their current revolution where they are fighting on all fronts. And I was at Jurgen Klopp's press conference earlier, and he said it's pretty likely both will be sticking around a little longer. So that indicates that if Barcelona were going to buy either player, you're probably looking at the overall figure for Coutinho, which is 142 million euros, rather than the overall deal. That would be the absolute vicious minimum. So that would be a struggle. Now the last one is one I say with a bit of a heavy heart, as someone who I watch quite regularly. But I think it could happen, and there have been linked before. Richarlison at Everton, I really like the way he plays. He always shows for the ball, even in a very poor, underperforming team right now. He's actually more adept centrally than out wide. I think right now he's got 5 goals and 2 assists from the central role compared to 3 and 2 on the left. He always does all the hard work, and like Jesus, he does a lot of tracking, which I didn't really notice until we went into the behind closed door setting here because of COVID, and you didn't have the crowds, and you notice how much he actually did, because when he didn't, Jordan Pickford, the Everton goalkeeper, the England goalkeeper, would scream at him mercilessly about get back, get tracking. And so when that sees been planted, you think, wow, he does really do a lot of extra work, and a brilliant player, really fearless. He's won the Copa America, he's won a gold medal at the Olympics, obviously the expense of Pedri last summer. And I think the only way that deal happened, and we know there was links in the past, was if Everton, as currently appears likely, are relegated from the Premier League. They've never gone down before. They haven't been down for 50 odd years. But if they do go down, they will be forced to accommodate the Premier League's, the English football's version of FFP, because they can't afford all these high earners that they've brought in over the past 5 years. So Dominic Calvert-Lewin, who's the England striker, will probably be sold, but there's also a more likely risk that Richarlison could go. So if the price was right for Barca, I think Richarlison would go. Obviously, it has to be right for Everton too, but personally, because I cover both Liverpool and Everton, I really wouldn't want to see that happen, because I don't want to be covering the team in the second tier of English football, because it's demoralising. But as I say, it could pay off for Barca if it does happen. So but we've got to wait and see. But there's definitely mileage in that one, and especially with the way Xavi plays, I think will be perfect for it.
Now, left back is a little interesting because we don't evaluate that through goals and assists. So, when you're looking for a left back for Barcelona, not even to replace Alba, but to compete with Alba and beyond, it's funny because you have Lucas Digne right in front of you at Everton. But what kind of player, Richard, do you kind of look for as the left back option or the option that Barca should be looking at?
I think goals and assists are probably the biggest thing. I think, especially the assist, that's you bread and butter as an attacking fullback. And we know Xavi likes to play with the wing backs or fullbacks rather. So I think players who can get crossed into the box for the central player. It doesn't have to be an out-and-out number 9, but it can be an attacking player of some repute. And that's a big thing. And when you look at the list of players who have been linked with Barca recently, there's not a great deal to jump out. But one who does for me is ex-Barca B, Alejandro Grimaldo at Benfica. I think that dream team tag's going to be getting quite heavily used if he comes in. But you look at the stats, the last count, so this might not be today, but the last count was 6 goals and 9 assists, which for a left back, that's incredible. In a team like Benfica, which has a lot of attacking qualities and doesn't really rely on fullbacks as much to get goals, and I think I've had the fortune to see him up close again when they played in the Champions League against Liverpool at Anfield, and again looked good defensively. He stopped Mohamed Salah on a few occasions, and there was a moment in the first half where Roberto Firmino had a cutback that Luis Diaz looked almost certain to on the end of and put in the net, and he cut it out really superbly. And I think you can't underestimate how good that defensive duties are for a fullback who can also create goals. And I think the last reports were from Mundo Deportivo, which said that the fee could be as low as €20 million. Now, just looking at those numbers, the goals and assists, I think that's probably a gamble worth taking, and especially with the way Xavi wants to play, because I think that he will be perfect for that. But again, there are other players in the equation, but I think for that price, that's a pretty good deal for someone who's clearly on the up, and it does make you wonder, did he need to leave the La Masia confined to develop? We see that a lot with players like Garcia, we saw it with players like Thiago, Cesc Fabregas. You go through the list, there's always been players who have sort of branched out and have become weight goals, and then Barca feel they have to get them back, and it looks like Grimaldo could be another one.
Yeah, it's funny because he was a case where it was a disagreement with Luis Enrique, where he was probably going to be the backup left back, but he fell out with, Luis Enrique had a big personality too, where he's also fallen out that being Luis Enrique with Jordi Alba. He expects a lot of his fullbacks as Pep Guardiola, as any of those, especially those Spanish managers in the modern game. The expectations of a fullback, it's one of the same reasons why if Xavi is out on a player like Serginho Dest, it makes sense because the positional play and the discipline that he needs from his outside backs are elite. And there are not too many elite outside backs in world football. And I think you're a little higher on me than Grimaldo, but it's interesting because I think you're right. Like 20 million for his output makes a ton of sense. Like that's worth a gamble at the price of fullbacks today, because you could quickly, again, when I say left backs, you could quickly make an argument that Alex Grimaldo is pushing into the top 15 of left backs in the world, that he's in that conversation, or top 10 even, because of how far Benfica was on display in the Champions League this year. Just the league is just the only question you have about Grimaldo. And so at 26, like he's in his prime, and 20 million would be fine. But I don't know why Benfica wouldn't pick up the phone and say, hey, he's got a contract expiring next season, not this year. So if you want him this year, it's going to be 50. And then he'll walk for free next summer, right? Like I think Benfica is in a place where, as I said, they're going to overprice their players. So I'm not sure about that. And, I don't know. So there's what I think about Grimaldo. I would put a little more credence in the rumors that we've heard about Javi Gailan of Celta de Vigo. And that reasoning is that we went to Celta last year for 7 million euros. And his story is pretty insane too. Javi Gailan from Celta de Vigo. His 3.66 tackles per game in the 97th percentile for all outside backs. He's also played 96% of all available minutes for Celta this year. He has just 3 assists. So that's kind of where you do raise a red flag that will he fit at Barcelona? Not sure. But if you want your right back to be the one that gets forward and you want your left back to be a bit more stay at home, which is, again, not how Xavi's been playing with that strong side, left wing where you have multiple players on the left wing, creating those triangles, creating those boxes. But Gailan's interesting because at 27, he's had this insane rise from in 2015, he was playing for his tiny hometown team of Badajoz in the southwest part of Spain. Then he moves to mighty Cordoba in 2015, as I mentioned. And then it takes him 2 years to get promoted to that first team. Then 2 years after that to Huesca in 2019, as they entered the Liga for the first time, then makes the move to Celta last summer. So, that's just remarkable. And we talk about late bloomers every now and again, but that's just kind of ridiculous for a player to, at basically 25, burst on the scene and become one of the best left backs in the Liga. Because as much as we like Jose Gaya, and Jose Gaya is clearly a better player than Javi Gailan, truthfully, and Gaya is probably from Valencia the best option to really push Alba for challenge him for minutes, or even if someone's going to take Alba's spot, it's going to be Gaya more so than I'd say almost any other player. Grimaldo is, to me, just again, still a lesser version of Alba. And then Gailan is, again, a very different player, but a backup to Jordi Alba with how good Alba still is. But Gaya, it seems like he's going to extend, and that's not going to happen. But that would be the example where, Gailan actually is kind of similar stuff to Gaya, except he doesn't create as much. But as you mentioned, a Barca left back has to create. So let me flip that on its head a little bit, though. If you want to shore up a left-footed center back problem and a left back problem, and potentially a backup defensive midfield problem, Lisandro Martinez for Ajax has to be the name that you mentioned. And it's not just the Ajax connection. I want to peel that back, right? It's not just about Ajax. The guy's 24 years old. He's entering his prime. Apparently the number might be 35 million euros. And for you to get a utility player who can play as he's actually played as a single pivot occasionally for Ajax and can play at left back when needed and can play at left center back. And it's not like the Araujo at right back thing where Araujo has to deputize as a right back. No, he's actually comfortable as a left back. Doesn't get forward as much, obviously, but he can still get forward. I think Lisandro Martinez, when I talk about reinforcing the back line, has got to be first on that list because of all the different things he can do.